I'm Tzivia MacLeod, and I'm going to be talking about Jewish children's books. What's new, what's different, and what has stayed the same. Here's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. First of all, what are Jewish children's books? What makes them children's books? What makes them Jewish? What has changed in Jewish children's publishing? And mostly I'm going to be talking about what's changed over my lifetime, which is the last let's say 30 to 50 years. We're going to talk about what has stayed the same in Jewish children's publishing, which is quite a lot. We're going to talk about diversity in today's Jewish children's books. Spoiler alert, one of the things that has changed is diversity, and we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to look at the role of PJ Library in revitalizing Jewish children's publishing today. And then talk a little bit at the end about what to do if you have a Jewish children's book in you. So let's get started. First of all, just to introduce myself, who am I? I'm a writer of children's books for Jewish families and children, and anyone else who's interested in reading a book about Clarence's topsy-turvy Shabbat, or interested in reading a Shavuot story about monkeys, or interested in reading about my little village in Israel. I've commercially published, that means publishing with a mainstream publisher, these and another book coming out. I've also self-published a number of books. I'm Assistant Regional Advisor of SCBWI Israel. SCBWI is the International Professional Organization for children's book writers, illustrators, and translators. It's all over the world. It's very small here in Israel, but I am the assistant regional advisor. And as part of that role, that means that I work with many, many writers, both published and what we like to call pre-published, because of course that's what everybody aspires to. My personal goal, or one of my personal goals, is to create great Jewish books and to help other people do the same. To be able to do that, we have to understand a little bit about what a Jewish book is, what makes it great, and that's a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about. So, first of all, before we start talking about what are Jewish children's books and what's changed in Jewish children's books, we have to look at what Jewish children's books actually are. So you can pause for a second if you want. I'm just going to go on. Pause for a second, think about what comes to mind when I say Jewish children's books. There's actually 3 ideas in there, pretty big ideas. I've broken them down here into 2 columns. Jewish children's books are books, and usually when we're talking about children's books, we're talking about board books, picture books, early chapter books, middle grade, and young adult. This is an example of a picture book. I probably should have gotten a chapter book. There's a couple over there. And they're also Jewish. Now, what does that mean? Could mean a variety of things. Could mean a Jewish author, could mean Jewish characters, Jewish topics, Jewish values, could mean any one of a number of things. That's all the props that I brought. By the way, I've just used them all up. Let's pause. Actually, let's go back for just a second and take a look at what a children's book is, just to make sure that we're on the same page a little bit. Because this actually has changed over the last 40, 50 years. So a picture book is generally aimed at readers ages 4 to 8. This one isn't mine. It's by Rochelle Burke. I'm in a group of very talented female authors of kidlit, children's literature, with her, but I don't know her personally. Ages 4 to 8, under 800 words nowadays, and in fact, many picture books are under 500 words these days. Contrasting that with something like Bedtime for Francis, which apparently has about 1,276 words. A book like this might not actually get published today because there's a lot crammed in between these pages. Speaking of which, picture books almost always have 32 pages. Full color, you've got words and text interacting on fully designed pages with a balance of words and art telling the story. That hasn't always been the case. Certainly full color was not something that you could take for granted when I was growing up. And often the words and the pictures were on separate pages. And one thing, when I say the balance of words and art telling the story, in older styles of picture books, they're actually just illustrated storybooks in that the illustrations generally show you what's going on in the text. In today's picture books, that is no longer the case. Often the text won't say something, and it will, in fact, only be described in the illustrations. And that's one of the secrets to making today's books shorter, is that you don't need to say she put on her favorite red dress with polka dots. You can just say she put on her dress. The illustration is going to show that the dress is red with polka dots. So it's a little bit more showing and a little bit more interaction between the words and pictures. Middle grade is, I've written here 8 to 12, ages 8 to 12-ish. That goes down and also up quite a bit. I love reading middle grade. It's easy, it's fun. It's like popcorn. You can consume it really quickly. Middle grade books are generally between 25,000 and 50,000 words, and they're PG rated, meaning that they're going to be, minimal violence, mild violence, and crushes and hand holding. Mostly they're going to focus on a child finding their way in a world that underestimates them. As opposed to a picture book is usually more straightforward, a child or animal coping with a situation that only they can solve. And so you've got the strong main character solving a problem throughout the story. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, but it is important that the main character be the one to solve her own problem. So that's basically, there are other types of picture books, but those are the two biggest genres of picture books today. Now, if we're going to look at what's changed in Jewish children's books, we need to look at what there was, way back when. Now, we could go back to any period here, but looking at the time when I was growing up, these are the kinds of stories that people would have been reading. Some of the titles, All of a Kind Family is perennially popular, still in print. And in fact, there are a couple of picture book ones, I believe, that have come out. Carp in the Bathtub, very classic, Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, which is actually kind of leading into the more modern period of Jewish stories, where you have a main character who happens to be Jewish, but it's not necessarily central to the plot. That's one of the things that we're seeing a lot today, is a character who's Jewish, but the story isn't really about being Jewish. Looking at those books from way back when, maybe you can just take a second and think about what differences you've noticed over the years as Jewish children's books have grown, changed, and developed. I'm going to go on. You can pause if you'd like to keep thinking about that. Here are just a few of the ways that I've noticed, and not just me, I did kind of a survey of experts via Facebook. So Jewish books are more multicultural, more diverse. The art is better. I think that's maybe true of picture books in general. Jewish content may be light or background. There may not be a ton of Jewish content. Jewish content might be mixed with humor or mayhem or silliness. One of the things that is true across children's books throughout all genres is that adults are no longer authority figures. And so whatever, we can talk about that later. The biggest difference is perhaps that there are more Jewish books today for children, and many of them are very, very good. Here's what some of the experts said. I'm not going to read you all these quotes. I can send them to you if you want. But one quote is that it is more diverse, but there's still overwhelming focus on the Holocaust in Israel. I like this one. In today's Jewish books, the grandmother is more likely to be serving sushi than gefilte fish. And one person says, I think we gained in quantity, but not necessarily in quality. And she happens to like some of the older Jewish books. So I think that's an important principle anyway, that just because there's a lot doesn't mean it's all great. So what has stayed the same? A lot, quite a lot has stayed the same. You're always going to be seeing stories about important historical figures. You're always going to be seeing nostalgic stories about like kind of a shtetl story. That's what I like to think of it as, a shtetl story of these Ashkenazi, because the North American Jewish population is still overwhelmingly Ashkenazi. You're going to get these kind of Hamisha stories. Stories about traditional Jewish values, revolving around words like chesed or mitzvah or tikkun olam. This one just has it's not even, I don't even know if there's any other mention of Judaism until you get to the very last word, which is mitzvah, because they're making these hats and it's a mitzvah. Jewish values. Books that answer children's questions about their place as Jews in the world, or because they may not necessarily be Jewish, may not be being raised as Jews, questions about their Jewish culture and heritage. Another thing that has stayed the same is that in terms of Jewish publishers, Judaism is not generally mixed with other religions. So you may have family members of other cultures and religions and very mixed families today, but you're not going to see children who are being raised both Jewish and another religion. That's still very much taboo, which I'm trying not to weigh in with my own personal opinion, but I think that's a good thing. Today's children's books, I've touched on some of this already, have a strong sense of fun or mayhem or silliness. The main character's desire drives the story forward. And I think, today's picture books especially have a very strong through line where the main character is kind of involved in the world around her and bringing people together. Here we actually have a child who starts out asking silly questions, and then the adults all admit that they also had silly questions about Passover, is the theme of this book. The main character is solving her own problem. Adults are minor characters, often mocked, and here I'll weigh in again and say I don't like that, but it is the reality of children's books. If you are going to make an adult be the main character, and I guess both of these books of mine have adults as main characters, but they're childlike in some way. So here, it's a woman, she's trying to get some sleep. This is me, this is my alter ego. She's trying to get some sleep and her village is full of noises, so she can't get to sleep. Probably, however, what I'm going to say is the biggest change that has taken place in children's books since whenever it was that you last read children's books is diversity. And the next few slides, next few minutes, we're going to talk about what kinds of diversity we're seeing these days. So I'm turning this over to you again. You can pause it, you can think about it. What comes to mind when I say diverse books? I'm going to go on. There's all kinds. I think that the first thing that may come to mind is race. I've got that down here as number 3. But we have a lot of different kinds of diversity. Socioeconomic, poor people, rich people. Stories are about all kinds of different people, people with abilities, disabilities, people in a rainbow of skin colors, people from different cultures and backgrounds, people of different genders and sexual orientations, people who speak different languages, whatever those languages have to be, although obviously that's very tied in with culture. So today's children's books really try very hard to reflect the entire spectrum of the human experience. That was not always the case. And this was what started it off in 2012, 2014. Surveys of main characters in children's books revealed that 3% were African American. And I believe that at the time, the survey also showed that more main characters of children's books were animals than they were African American, Latino American, whatever, American, First Nations people, Asian people. These people were seriously underrepresented in children's books, and Jewish children's books as well, because Jewish children's books in North America, because the North American population is by and large Ashkenazic, Jewish children's books tended to be about white Ashkenazi Jews doing white Ashkenazi Jewish things. So it started as a grassroots movement, the We Need Diverse Books movement in 2014. It has spread throughout children's publishing. Some people are tempted to dismiss it as political correctness, but I like to see it as empowering children, reflecting children's lives, and making space for everyone at the table. There really is, at the table, on the bookshelf, there really is room for everybody. The first type of diversity that we're going to look at here is ability and disability. We're seeing these are all Jewish stories about people with different types of disabilities. The first one is the main character is autistic. The middle one, she is deaf. And the bottom one, he, I believe, had a brain injury at birth. It's a middle grade chapter book. Today's stories about disability are not stories about overcoming disability, because disability today is seen really as something that can be a normal part of a person's life. Autism isn't something that you need to cure. And the other thing is that authors and publishers try to avoid inspiring stories, which is just about somebody who overcomes a disability. They manage to do something despite their disability. Now, that doesn't mean that doesn't happen, but generally, and I'm going to be saying this about all of these things, generally that's in the background. You have something else going on in the world around the character. Their life is not entirely about their disability. Just like real children with autism, just like real children who are deaf, just like real children with a brain injury, they don't spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year thinking about that condition. They are just people like everyone else living their lives. Race is another thing that we're seeing a lot more of in Jewish stories. These are stories about Jews and non-Jews, because, as I've said here, Jews can be of any race. So all of these that I've shown here are Jewish stories about people of different races. The top one is my book, which is coming out next year, Pumpkin Pie for Sigd. It's about a girl who makes Aliyah from the United States, and her best friend is from an Ethiopian family. So they're celebrating, she's missing Thanksgiving, and they're celebrating Sigd, the Ethiopian Jewish festival, together. The bottom one is Jews of Color. This is the Asian main character who happens to be Jewish, and this is actually co-authored this is just a test, co-authored by a Chinese person and what I assume is a Jewish person. And then this one is also Asian. This is a story of a girl with two grandmothers, and one grandmother is Jewish, one grandmother is Chinese, and they're competing for who makes the best chicken soup. I haven't read it, so I can't tell you how they resolve it. A lot of these kinds of books do deal with the idea of Jewish children with mixed racial heritage, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of those. Also stories about Jews from all possible racial backgrounds. And we're going to see some more of those in the next few slides as well. Culture, because it's hard to tell where race ends and culture begins. But what we're seeing culturally is not just these Ashkenazi stories. We're seeing stories of immigrant and mixed cultures, stories that aren't just set in the US and Canada, stories about Jews interacting with their surrounding culture. So an example here that I enjoyed, top one is about the Sephardi Jewish festival of Mimuna after Pesach. Lucky Broken Girl is about a Cuban family who immigrates to the West. They're Jewish. They're actually Ashkenazi, but they've spent a couple generations living in Cuba, so they have kind of a Latino twist on that. Buen Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, self-explanatory. Whole story of half a girl. She's half Indian and half Jewish. Also a very popular middle grade book. Gender and sexual orientation. Now we've actually, the children's book world has recently celebrated the 30th, I want to say 30th, but maybe 20th anniversary of the book Heather Has Two Mommies, which is actually by a Jewish author, Leslie Newman, who has a number of Jewish picture books out as well. But we've moved beyond that in the sense that sexual orientation and gender are in the background. And often Judaism is in the background as well. For example, Lily and Duncan, the two main characters, one is Jewish and one is transgender and one has a mental health disorder. So I don't think Judaism is actually mentioned in that one at all, but it always comes up in discussions of Jewish books about gender and that touch on gender and sexual orientation. The top book, the main character has two dads. This one, main character has two moms. This one, little girl is looking forward to being a flower girl. She's looking forward to being a flower girl. And at the end, the surprise twist ending, which I didn't love that it was a twist ending, but it seems to be that there are two brides is the twist. That I don't think that's a great twist, but anyway. So either the main character or a character in their family or a character, one of their friends, may have a non-traditional gender or sexual orientation, but that's always dealt with at the kids' level. So again, it's not about whether they have two dads. It's about being a superhero on Purim, for example. It's about being a flower girl at a wedding. And then the sexual orientation is backgrounded. When it comes to diversity, I think that the thing that we're all striving for is authenticity. And the way that you get at authenticity is to ask, am I the right person to tell this story? So here, with this book, I was the right person to tell this story because this was based on a morning when I was trying to get some sleep and it just was not working. There was just too much noise outside my window. So that's authenticity. When it comes to diversity, it's not really about accepting diversity. It's about putting it in the background, but also enjoying it, savoring the best of what all these cultures have to offer. And I've just included here the hashtag own voices, which is sometimes used for stories that are told by the people who have the right to tell that story. So this one, for example, this is a shtetl story. And I happen to be very Ashkenazi on both sides. I feel like I have the right to tell the shtetl story. With my Pumpkin Pie for Sigd book, I felt a little more uneasy because Sigd, the Ethiopian Jewish festival, is not part of my culture. So I really did a lot of research. And then we also worked with a couple of consultants within the Ethiopian Jewish community, just to make sure that we were being authentic and true to what that story actually should be. So I've touched on all these themes, disability and race and culture and sexuality. Is that all there is in today's Jewish books? And the answer is no way, because the vast, vast, vast majority of Jewish books deal with what I think of as evergreen themes. And I mentioned this before. You're always going to have stories about Israel. You're always going to have stories about Jewish holidays. You're always going to hold this one up again. I only brought about 4 books, but it turns out they're great examples. You're always going to have books about life cycle, transitions, birth, life, bar mitzvah, death. I don't know what it is. Biblical stories. And I've got here, these 4 books that I've featured here are all by my fellow members of SCBWI Israel, very talented bunch of people. And we have a book about how Torahs are made, about wildlife and nature in northern Israel, a horse who saved Shabbat, and a traditional biblical story with a really fun rhyming twist. But what we are seeing in all of these books, they deal with evergreen themes, but they combine with the diversity themes that we've already discussed. So for example, if you have a book about Shabbat, if you look at this picture here, you can see that this is not typical Ashkenazi people. You have a couple of the shtetl people in the foreground. And this book has not been published yet, so I haven't read it. But then you have a couple of either Arab-looking or Sephardi-looking people in the background. In this book, How It's Made, the Torah book, I've covered it up here by accident, but there's a picture of a girl reading from the Torah, and I believe that this woman is a scribe who is writing a Torah. In this book, biblical stories, you don't have necessarily so much room for diversity, but if they can fit it in somehow, then they always find a way to try. There's also a lot going on right now in terms of historical books. And this is, as always, it's people who overcame obstacles, Jews who we can look up to as role models. These are generally historical books serve today's goals and today's values and ideologies. So for example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, this one came out before she passed away. Goldie Takes a Stand is about an early incident in the life of Golda Meir, where she's showing the leadership capabilities that she later showed as an adult, as Prime Minister of Israel. This is the story of Harvey Milk and the rainbow flag. He was Jewish and led the campaign for Pride. This book doesn't actually mention Judaism in any way. He was Jewish, but and a lot of Jewish organizations have picked up on the book as a valuable addition to Jewish libraries because of its historical themes and Jewish main character. So is it a Jewish book? It comes back to, it's about a Jewish person. Can we consider it a Jewish book? You decide. Some of the books that are historical kinds of books or books, centered around themes like civil rights are less fun than important. So these have a little bit less of the mayhem and excitement of the rest of today's kids' books. They can still be very good. They can still be very well written. Sometimes I will say for better or for worse, because some books do get out and do get published that are not fantastic books that just, seem to serve political and ideological goals of today's publishers. But I'm not gonna go into that too much. I did, however, want to mention PJ Library because honestly, no discussion of Jewish children's literature today would be complete without touching on PJ Library. Now, a lot of people believe that PJ Library publishes books, and originally they didn't, although now they're starting, I think, to move into publishing a little bit more. But what they started out doing is offering cash incentives, financial awards to writers of excellent Jewish book manuscripts. And so traditionally, the way that it worked is that you submit your manuscript to PJ Library. If they really like it, then you get an award, and then you can go to a publisher and you can say, this has received an award from PJ Library. And if you publish it, then they will distribute it. The main thing that PJ Library does, they're an engagement and literacy program for families with young children. That's taken from their website. They distribute tens of thousands of great Jewish kids' books to families all over North America. And I think perhaps England, but I'm not 100% sure. They have expanded into a middle grade section as well, which is called PJ Our Way. Now, for the youngest kids, I believe they just send a book based on the age group of the children. For PJ Our Way, I believe the kids get to choose which book they receive. It's like a book of the month club kind of thing. So essentially, the process is that you submit your manuscript. If they like the manuscript, they give you the award. You take the book to the publisher. You say PJ Library wants to distribute it, and it can help you get a publishing deal. And that's what happened for which of these? That's what happened for this book. This book won the PJ Library Author Incentive Award. They loved it. And then I took that to Carbon and I said, hey, this has an award. PJ Library wants to send it out to tens of thousands of families all over North America. And they said, sure, we'll publish it. So they did. And this came out in April of 2020. For authors, unfortunately, when I say they send it out to tens of thousands of Jewish children all over North America, they get the book at a really steep discount. So it does not necessarily mean that you're going to get rich, but it is nice to think of all the kids kind of opening up those envelopes and enjoying your book. They get a soft cover. They don't get a hard cover like this. PJ Library generally does not accept stories about the Holocaust, about death, or reference books. And they are only looking for what I've called here broad spectrum Judaism or Jewish values. What that means is that when they send out these tens of thousands of books to households all over North America, they're sending them to households that are Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, whatever, just all areas of the spectrum. People who are not affiliated, people who are super affiliated. Why are they over there? I don't know. People all over the place. So they need books that are going to appeal across that entire spectrum. And that means they can't get too much into all the details. For example, you can have a book about Shabbat because that's very important. And that's something that people have in common across the entire spectrum. And you can show, for example, let me just see here, they're making challahs. They have, see here, here's their little Shabbat table with their little monster. I don't know if you can see it. Buy the book if you like it. So Shabbat is an important theme that they're excited to pick up on, but they wouldn't publish a book that gets into detailed halacha, where it talks about the specific details of how to keep Shabbat, because that's not something that's going to appeal to a huge spectrum of people. So they just, when I'm submitting a story, to PJ Library, I sort of have to keep in mind, is this story appropriate for anyone, regardless of their level of Jewish affiliation? So they tend to be looking for a specific thing, but it has created tremendous opportunities for writers, because not only Jewish publishers, but also publishers outside the Jewish world are familiar with PJ Library, and it really, winning their award, winning their approval before your book is published, really gives you a lot of ammunition to take the book to publishers or even to an agent, and to set and to know that you'll be taken seriously as a writer, that the book has a real future within Jewish homes and libraries, at the very least, if not, in a broader market. I wanted to mention very briefly that the founder of PJ Library, Harold Greenspoon, created it as a philanthropic endeavor in 2005. Let me just flip, 2005. Yes, I don't know why I put that on 2 pages. But so he founded it. It's now run entirely philanthropically in cooperation with Jewish foundations, whatever it's called, federations all over North America. But they also have 2 other little branches that not a lot of people are aware of in North America, which is, they have the main PJ Library. They have Sifriyat Pijama, which is the Israeli PJ Library, which tends to focus on Jewish holidays and Jewish values, usually Israeli stories on Jewish themes. And then they also have Maktabat Al-Fanus, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is Arabic PJ Library, where they distribute books in kindergartens, Arab-speaking kindergartens throughout Israel. I forgot to mention that the Sifriyat Pijama books are distributed throughout Hebrew-speaking kindergartens all over Israel. So the Maktabat Al-Fanus is distributed through Arab-speaking kindergartens. Obviously, those aren't going to be Jewish books and books about Jewish holidays. They tend to be books translated from English or written in Arabic in other countries, more speaking to universal values than Judaism specifically, and certainly not Islam, because the Arab population in Israel is a variety of different religions, including Islam, Christianity, Druze. So they're general values rather than specific religious messages. So that's PJ Library. Let's go on to that. And finally, we come to the penultimate page, which is, why are we talking about this at all? So we're talking about this in part because if you're a grandparent or a relative, you may be part of the market for Jewish children's books. That has always been true. Books are a great present that kind of span the generation, and they're also something you can enjoy together across the generations, whether you're volunteering in schools and reading to kids, volunteering in libraries, or just sitting with your own grandkids, great-grandkids, great nieces. I have a great niece and some great nephews. And in terms of Jewish books, this is even more true today, because children probably aren't attending Jewish schools. Most Jewish children don't. Many don't live in areas with strong Jewish libraries, may or may not be receiving a book a month from PJ Library, but I hope so. If you know of any Jewish kids, you should make sure that they're signed up for it. But even so, that's only 1 book a month. You can always give them a book that they'll treasure. So how do you choose a great Jewish book? First thing I suggest is look for my name on the cover. The first thing I suggest is that you look for a book that puts a terrific story first. You've got to have fun reading it. It's got to be fun to read, and hopefully you'll be sitting down and reading it together. I know of a bunch of grandparents who do it on Zoom or with Skype. You can get together. You have a weekly time to sit and read stories together. So you need books that are going to be fun to read together, and hopefully books that are going to broaden their minds, open up a new part of the world that they might not have ever thought about before, whatever that may be, and maybe even books that will open your mind a little bit. I have learned so much from children's books. It's simply not funny. My kids actually make fun of me because I tend to choose books about people who aren't like us, because that's the most fascinating to me. So I tend to choose diverse books, and my kids are probably a little bit sick of it, but I like to think that we have all learned quite a bit from the children's books that we've read over the years. And I hope to continue that with my grandchildren, God willing. The last thing I wanted to touch on is whether or not you have a Jewish kids book in you. It's very possible, if you've had a Jewish life, if you've had Jewish experiences, if you've heard family stories, you may have a Jewish book in you. And if so, get writing. There is no time like the present. If you're not sure what you're going to write about, start by brainstorming ideas. Whatever it is, get the pen on paper, get it written down. Once you've done that, I strongly recommend that you read what's out there today so that you know what's selling, you know what's on bookshelves, you know what's in stores, libraries, in schools. I also recommend that you join a supportive organization like SCBWI, Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators internationally, which can offer a lot of help, from the basics, a workshop in how to get inspired, how to write, to more advanced topics like how to find an agent, how to submit, how to write a winning query letter so a publisher's going to pick up your story. SCBWI can help you bridge, from being an amateur to being a professional. Certainly it's helped me. The last thing that I recommend is that you seek out objective critiques from partners or a group. If you've created a story that's fabulous, I've talked to a lot of people over the years, though, that have created a story and then they say, my grandkids love it. My kids love it. My nephews love it. I teach a class. I teach kindergarten. These people say to me, I'm a kindergarten teacher and the kids in my kindergarten love the story. That is fabulous, but what they love is you. And that is not necessarily a guarantee that objectively your book is ready for prime time. With a critique partner or a critique group, you can get feedback on your story, you can improve your story, make it a lot more marketable and a little bit more ready for prime time. The other thing that you have is the choice of how you want to publish today, because self-publishing has become very, very easy. It used to be 40, 50 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. If you wanted to self-publish, you would have to go to a lot of expense of laying out the book professionally and having it printed, and then you'd end up with boxes and boxes of books in your garage and be the laughing stock of the neighborhood. So that is no longer true. The costs have come down quite a bit for self-publishing. So depending on how much help you need with it. For example, if you need illustrations, you're still going to be paying an illustrator quite a bit, perhaps. The biggest pro of self-publishing is that there are no gatekeepers. That means there's nobody to say, we're not going to publish your book. Nobody's going to turn you down. You can publish your book, and a lot of people love that. A lot of people just want to publish a book to share with family and friends. They don't necessarily want to be a millionaire. They don't necessarily want to be a New York Times bestseller. They just want to get their book out there. The cons of self-publishing are that the quality is generally low, and you don't necessarily sell a lot unless you're willing to put money into marketing. The other alternative is commercial publishing, where you get a really nice quality, often hardcover book. So you've got higher distribution potential because it can go to schools and libraries. You get a lot more credibility because you've got your name on the dust jacket. Look at that, I have my name on a dust jacket. A lot more credibility, but the cons are that it's very difficult to break in. And unfortunately, there's still not a ton of money in it. So, some of the pros and cons of different methods of publishing, just depending on what your goals are. There's no right or wrong answer. There's just you, your goals, and which type of publishing is going to help you accomplish your writing dreams. That's about all that we have time for today. I want to thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. That's my email address. I'm not going to read it to you. But I have been Tzivia MacLeod. These have been my books. They're fabulous. Let me see if I can get all three of them all held up again like that. These three have been my books. And I want to thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any questions.